Guardian power level and content difficulty is a topic that comes up a lot around the Destiny community, and I think it's something that everyone at Bungie kind of knows needs to be addressed, but just doesn't really want to. And I don't blame them, this is a really tough one to figure out. But look, I think it's really time to start reevaluating the power leveling structure, as well as how Bungie goes about making their content more difficult nowadays, because as it stands right now, we're starting to see the cracks in these fundamental mechanics, and I think these are cracks that could seriously hinder Destiny in the long run. Also, my friends and I just opened up the Hidden Disciples Discord server to everyone. I really want this to be a more casual space for anyone to come in and just find people to link up with, whether it's for raids, trials, nightfalls, or anything else. Of course, my friends and I will also be down in the trenches doing raids and whatnot every once in a while, so if you'd like to come play with us, the link is in the description. If not, that's totally fine. On to the rest of the video. So, power in Destiny. Let's start with what it is. Your Guardian's overall power level, essentially how strong you are, is determined by the gear you're wearing. If all of your gear is 1560 power level, then your Guardian's overall power level is a nice and even 1560. Now, if some of your gear is 1520 and some is 1530, then your power level will be somewhere around 1525. Every enemy in the game also has a power level that they're set to. For example, the Rulk encounter, the final boss in the Vow of the Disciple raid, every enemy you fight there will be 1550 power level, so you must scale to match or exceed them in power if you want the best chances at success. You of course increase your power level by doing more difficult activities that reward items that drop at a higher power level. Now look, we got a lot to talk about in this video, but the overarching idea is this. As it stands right now, the main problem with power and other facets of the game that we'll touch on soon is that us Guardians in Destiny are not playing to become stronger, we're playing to become less weak. This is a very layered issue and one that has no doubt crossed Bungie's mind before. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up now is because at this rate we're getting a few hundred power levels added on to our Guardian's cap every year to keep us playing. If nothing changes, this number is just going to keep going up, and once we get to 2000, 3000 power, it will start to get old. Hell, it feels old now. I don't really want to see Bungie just caking on power levels to keep us playing. It just feels kinda lazy. Now, let me say up front, Bungie is not lazy. I'm sure they also want to do something about this system to some degree. The problem is the developers and players are so used to this system that changing it now seems like a mountainous task. Now, before we start giving out some ideas on how we may go about fixing this, we kind of also have to address the topic of difficulty, which of course does mean talking about champions. I know we're all tired of talking about them, but at this point, champions are really just a way to artificially increase the difficulty of an activity, and so is power level. Look at Master Vow of the Disciple, or really any Master level content. What's the main difference? It's power and champions. The enemies are higher power level, thus soak up more shots and deal more damage. The champions, while providing some additional layer of thinking, are only there to force you into a certain playstyle and weaponry. Champions aren't always bad, it's just that the way they're currently being handled is not great. Imagine if champions instead were like special enemy variants, like if an unstoppable ogre was a special kind of ogre that had a tendency to rush your fire team and keep the pressure on via close proximity. Or if barrier servitors were like a special variant that could spawn mini servitors that would give benefits to nearby fallen. You wouldn't necessarily need anti-barrier rounds, it's more so an enemy variant as opposed to a universal modifier. Again, right now power and champions, and modifiers to an extent, are essentially the primary ways Bungie will go about increasing an activity's difficulty. If you've taken any math course past pre-calc, think of champions as like E, or e to the x. It doesn't make the problem harder in any meaningful way, it's just cheating. Like, this nightfall isn't hard enough. Let's add all 3 champion types instead of just 2. You see what I mean? More bullets and harder hitting enemies isn't really a meaningful way to make things more difficult. This was a very common criticism of the original Destiny 1, and to an extent, it still is a criticism of Destiny 2. Now look, I come on here and I say all this shit about artificially increasing difficulty and the illusion of progression. It's easy for me to complain about this stuff, but how do we fix it? Well, I have a couple ideas, the first of which I started discussing earlier, and that is folding champion-like mechanics into enemy variants. These champion-level variants wouldn't require any specific mods or weaponry to take them down, but would offer slightly more interesting spins on the existing champion mechanics. Like we talked about earlier, something like an unstoppable ogre variant that charges towards fire teams and behaves slightly differently, or a barrier servitor that will provide extra levels of support to enemy combatants, or maybe even an overload phalanx variant could place down his shield and create a healing zone for enemies, which you'd then have to destroy in some way. To me, this idea is kind of a middle ground compromise on the champion issue, at least for now. The next idea is simply imbuing special enemy units with abilities similar to that of Hive Guardians. Maybe the Hive, Fallen, and Cabal could utilize light abilities to some degree, while Vex, Taken, and Scorn could utilize dark abilities given to them by the Black Fleet. The community seems to really like the role Hive Guardians play in content like Legendary Campaign, so I think adding more stuff like that couldn't hurt. Finally, to address the power issue, let's consider where power actually matters right now. In Crucible, it doesn't matter unless you're playing Trials. It doesn't really matter in Patrols or Strikes as long as they aren't Nightfalls, and it definitely doesn't matter in Gambit. So what we're left with is Dungeons, Trials, Raids, and Nightfalls. Now, bear with me on this one, but here's what I was able to think of. A system like Power kind of has to be in Destiny to some degree. I think the best we can do right now without some sort of overhaul is replacing the power number with some other indicator like a seasonal rank or symbol that displays what level of activity your Guardian is currently equipped for. In this hypothetical example, I have 4 levels: Guardian, Conqueror, Champion, and a final rank that could have a name that changes based on the theme of the season. Let's just pretend it's a Vex-themed season and the final rank is called Timeless. Essentially, every season you'll start at the level Guardian, which could be represented via a symbol in your inventory and on your weapons. Activities like Raids, Dungeons, and Trials could have a minimum rank to enter. Dungeons and Nightfalls could both be Conqueror level, Trials and Raids could be Champion level, and all Master level content, so GMs and Master Raids, could be Timeless, which again is this pretend season's final rank. However, similarly to Power, your gear would still determine your Guardian's final rank, and there would probably be some form of averaging system. I feel like reaching the final level in a season should actually feel rewarding and be challenging, so getting Timeless level loot should require the completion of unique seasonal challenges and whatnot to make the grind feel a bit different every season. Yeah, this rank would be reset at the beginning of next season, but that's essentially what happens to us right now. Adding on more power levels is essentially just Bungie's way of resetting our seasonal power level, so that we have more to grind for. A seasonal rank system would ultimately serve the same purpose as Power, but I feel like it would give Bungie a way to make the grind feel more unique season to season and feel more special. Imagine grinding for a cool sounding seasonal rank, rather than just grinding to get the number in your inventory to 1560. Now look, are there a lot of holes in the example I just laid out? Absolutely. But I feel like this is a decent enough example for a possible progression model that doesn't constantly rely on increasing the power cap. I know that was all a bit confusing, and I won't pretend to know everything. The topic of difficulty in Destiny is one that is very hard to find solutions for. And look, obviously Destiny is a very complex game, so the types of changes we've discussed are no doubt far from easy for Bungie to actually implement. But I feel like starting a constructive dialogue is at least a step in the right direction. If you have any thoughts on champions, power levels, or anything pertaining to Destiny's difficulty measures, I'd love to hear them below. Your ideas are just as valid as mine, and I'll definitely be featuring as many as I can in a future video. I'm gonna wrap it up here, but if you made it to the end, I truly appreciate that. As always, thank you so much for hanging out, and goodbye.